my name is Candice Leanos, and this is what the Lord has done for me. I grew up in a two-parent household most of my life where my mother and my father kind of was raised very differently. So my mom was third-generation Adventist, my dad was Catholic growing up. And so with that being said, there was lots of different challenges that we had as far as different point of views. So I saw lots of arguing or debates that took place, but mostly my mom definitely kept us in the church. She raised me and my brother to love the Lord, and so we was there as much as possible. Wednesday night prayer meeting, of course Friday nights for choir rehearsal, and Sabbath mornings from Sabbath school all the way down to AY. And so one of those things that she definitely was really pushing for us was the health ministries. She was a health educator herself, and so it was very vital for her that we really understood the health principles that's found in our Adventist teachings. However, my dad was, like I said, very opposite of that, but he definitely gave a lot of great tools in my tool belt that he basically raised me to love reading, into research, into question ideas, into to love poetry and all the different arts. So he also gave me another side of just growing up to kind of have like a well-balanced upbringing. And so with that being said, we did not grow up with family devotion mostly in our household. It was very that only happened at church. My mom was very busy, but I did have the blessing of living all the way out in a small town called Woodlawn, Tennessee. My dad was military, so we traveled a lot, but we settled our home mostly in Woodlawn, Tennessee, which is about 45 minutes outside of Nashville. So I had some peace and quiet. I absolutely loved studying, loved reading. I loved doing science experiments. I just had all this great joys that I remember coming up with and being outside and playing. My neighbors had lots of animals and just a joy to grow up. I was raised with one brother. I do have another sister now, but at the time growing up, it was just me and my brother, and we were raised in this small town. It was a community that was primarily white, and unfortunately we were the only brown people in this community. And so with that came some challenges that I didn't see happening at the time, but it became apparent when I was probably about the age of about third grade, where a friend of mine told me that I was no longer allowed to come over because, in her family's perspective, is because I was a black girl and they did not want us to affiliate. So it was hard enough that, yes, now I'm the only brown person, but now I'm also a Christian. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm not eating like everybody. I'm keeping the Sabbath, so I wasn't going to parties. I felt very isolated and alone. So of course, every Sabbath was just such a happy moment for me. It wasn't many of us in our church, but it was just such a joy to be able to spend having some commonality and to just enjoy this one day out of the week. And again, my brother, he was almost like my first child, if you will. He and I, of course, we had normal arguments as siblings do, but I was so protective because I was so concerned that he was going to be hurt in the ways I was hurt. So I would be just very overprotective. I would try to go use the bathroom if I can, just so I can go to his classroom, just to make sure he was safe and he was okay. But we have this sibling bond that just was really strong as we was growing up. My mom, although she did not necessarily teach us in our home the Adventist message, but she did do some great things as far as encouraging me to go to different camps, to go to camp meetings, and oftentimes because she was busy, she would send me with other people, and I was definitely had my faith strengthened in knowing what it was to be an Adventist in many ways. And I gave my heart to God about 6th or 7th grade. And I remember just really loving looking at the NAPS, an organization that's found out of Oakwood College, and they were doing missionary work. And I was so excited. I said, when I grew up, this is all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a missionary. And so as that time came, the enemy just really started to work on me. My parents got divorced, and it felt like now I'm taken out of this small country school and I'm put into a bigger school where there's way more different things that's being thrown at me. I'm also living amongst family members who maybe were not the best influences for me at the time, and they were also very young. So very early on, I was exposed to drugs and alcohol and gangs and all these different things that was definitely affecting the way I saw the world. And I struggled because I was so exhausted from always trying to stand out and to be a child of God all by myself. I didn't really feel like I had a group of people around me to support me outside of being at church. And so that became a really defining moment where because I was dealing with stress and because I was dealing with all these different problems, eventually I started to slowly sink myself into these things as well. So by the time I was 16 years old, I felt like I had already messed up. I had done so many different things. I had already smoked. I had already was drinking. I was dealing with so much stress that I felt like maybe God can no longer use me. And I completely gave up. And I was 16 years old when I found that I was pregnant with my first child. And if that was not hard enough, the father of my child also was going to prison for a few years. And so I was now forced to be a single mom. And at this time we were living in Chicago, so we had moved back home to where my family was. And that came with its own challenges as well, because now I am trying to be in school. I had to drop out of high school, and I went to college to become a nurse, but I'm trying to make this whole thing make sense, and it was a struggle. Fortunately, at that time, I was living in a household that, although, yes, you know, my child's father was in prison, but his family was strong Adventist people as well. And so I saw something that I had never seen before, and that is family coming together every morning to read devotionals together, to study Spirit of Prophecy. And honestly, it really irked me, because I felt like why are you doing all of this? I'm looking at their kids sometimes rebel. I felt like this was just redundant. It did not sit well with me. So I had a plan. I decided to start taking my classes earlier so I can sneak out the house a little bit before. And also they would want me to come together and read with them, and also read it in Spanish, so that was not a very strong suit of mine. So I just tried to hide from it. And what I saw when I got up earlier was his mother on her hands and knees praying every single morning, and completely silent, but just having that personal time with God. And it really struck a chord with me, because now I was able to see why this woman had so much peace and why she was so patient and so kind. I saw something that I had personally never witnessed for myself. And it stood in the back of my mind, and I kind of kept it, again, feeling like it was probably too late for me. I continued down my own path, and it got to this point where I was sitting in my car, completely devastated, completely just like aware of my situation. I didn't know where I was going to go that night, because I did not feel the best about staying at their house anymore, because I felt like I kept messing up. I wasn't abiding by their rules. But so I sat in my car this one day, and just the sadness began to wear on me. I started to recognize that I was grieving. I was grieving both my childhood, the things that I lost. I was hyper aware now of certain abuses that I dealt with, that maybe I suppressed growing up. I was hyper aware of knowing what God had wanted for me and just not going that direction. And I started to weep. And if you know anything about being in Chicago, this is not the place that you cry. This is not the place that you have to be kind of tough. And I started to fear, because as I was crying, my son was in that back seat, and he began to be aware of the pain that I was dealing with. And with that being said, he started to ask me questions, and he was only 3.5 at the time. And he was like, "Mom, why are you crying?" And I had to pause because I did not know exactly what the pain was. And I just told him, because I'm trying to talk to a 3-year-old, that, hey, mom's heart is hurting right now. And I watched him, just kind of observed himself. He was looking at his arms, he was looking at his legs, and he finally came across like an ouchie. And ever since he was little, I felt like I could not do anything to help my son. So I would always say to him, if he was ever hurt, Jesus will heal it, amen. That was all I knew. And so Jesus, he looked at his body and he found an old ouchie, and it was there months ago. So it was like his skin was a little bit darker. And he said, Mom, look, you see this ouchie? Remember? And he's like reminding me of what happened that day, and it was bleeding and it hurt so bad. And then he calmly said, Mom, but remember, Jesus healed it. And this little boy's voice gave me something that I never really realized that I needed, and that was hope. And so as he was looking at this ouchie, and he was still just observing it, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm not being too emotional, because I needed this young man to be a man, and I felt like emotions was too much, and I needed to show some strength for him in this time. And he didn't have his father to help him at this moment. So I was trying to pull it together, and as I was pulling it together, the tears just kept falling even more. And then he says, Mom, don't worry, you see I have a scar. And I said, yes, Armand, yes, you have a scar. And he was like, yes, but this scar means that Jesus is going to remind us. We might have scars, but it just helps us to remember that Jesus heals things. So your heart might have a scar, Mom, but Jesus is going to heal it. And in that moment, he reached over and he touched his little sister. Again, I'm only 18, 19 years old, and now I have 2 kids. And this was a newborn baby, and I had nowhere to go. I felt completely alone and depressed. And that day I just gave it to God. It was the most peace that I had, and I did not know the future. Eventually, I thought that if I just keep praying to God, that he was going to bless this marriage that I was in, and that he was going to sanctify it, and that when my ex was going to come out of the prison, that we were going to be this great family, we were going to do great things. And unfortunately, it did not end that way. And I was questioning God, like, God, you said that you was going to heal these things. Where are you? And God in that moment revealed to me that he was going to send somebody to me that was going to help draw me closer to God. And I could not explain this moment that I had. It was just like a silent moment that God just gave me this little bit of peace. And so I went ahead and allowed the divorce to take place. I was not a willing participant, but I went ahead and allowed it. What I did not know is that my husband got baptized that same weekend. And eventually I started going back to a different church. I started going to an English-speaking church. And when I was going, that's where I met my husband. And there was some questions that he had. I remember the very first question he asked me was, what do I think about the $144,000? And again, I'm like now 20 years old, 21, and I'm not knowing what I think about these things. It's things I never thought about, but I knew that this was the man that God had told me was going to bring me closer. And so we sat there, we had Sabbath together, ways that I've never had Sabbath. We prayed together in ways that I never prayed. And eventually we decided that we was going to start doing some more missionary work, and we went to Arizona, where I started to do more medical missionary. I started learning different processes of this, and I started to work for God. And Satan was not done. He was literally causing all kinds of distraction for me. My family was tearing apart. My mother left the church. I felt again in this place of loneliness, and I did not know where to turn. And so eventually we moved here to Florida. And in this process, it felt like we had so many highs and so many lows, but there was another moment where I have now 5 kids, and their names spelled out the word peace. Their acronym is the word peace, and we did not plan it like that, but God was good and he allowed it to be this way. But in this moment of just constantly just working, doing God's will, and being very active, I recognized that I still felt a sense of loneliness. I felt questioning, is God really here? And We dealt with a lot of church hurt. We dealt with a lot of situations, in particular my daughter. And in that process, as I started to be away from what I would consider God's people, not knowing where to go, in this lonely moment, I cried out to God again. I was in a car in the same exact location that we're in today. And I just said, God, I have been doing all these things for you. I have been praying, I have been working for you, and I feel like you have still left me out here by myself. If you are real, I need you to reveal yourself in a real way. And a week later, I was on the phone. I had some clients. I started a business, a wellness coaching business, and I was talking to a client, and I felt the Holy Spirit tell me to get off the phone and immediately go check on my daughter. And in that moment, I got off the phone. I've never felt that kind of impression before. So I ran to her room and I didn't see her. And I'm yelling her name. I'm looking at my phone, looking to see her location. It looked like she was in the house. And I noticed that the bathroom door light was on. And I went to go shake the door, and it was locked. And I'm calling her name. And I tell my son to hurry up and get the key, so that way we can unlock this door as quickly as possible. And before he can even make it, the door just opened. And what I found in that moment was a note. It was a suicide note. It was the hardest part of most mothers can ever see, and I found her in a tub, completely blue. We drug her out. And in that moment, I started remembering, like, okay, God, this is why I went through nursing school. And yes, I felt like I threw it away. I felt like I just started homeschooling my kids, and I didn't live in this calling, but I was able to use these resources that He's called me to, so that way I can help save my child's life. And I was thankful in those moments, but I was still wrestling with God, like, why did you allow this? What did I do wrong? I tried to do everything that you say to do, and yet my daughter is still suffering. And how do I fix this? How can you fix this? And just still remembering just the prayer that I asked the week before. I'm like, God, how are you showing up in this? I don't see you. And completely ignoring the fact that that door just opened on its own. I wasn't even there in that moment. But eventually we get to the hospital. She's doing great. She's feeling better. And then we have to leave her. And it was the saddest moment for me. I had not left her from that day 18 years prior, where she was in that car. I did not leave her side. We stayed close, and I always was trying to pour into her. And so this was hard for me to just leave her side at this moment. And as I got in the car, and tears still falling, my husband is trying to console me. My little girl, who's now 3, the same age as my son, asked me the same exact question that my oldest son asked just 18 years prior. She said, Mom, why are you crying? And she said the same thing, Jesus is going to heal it, Mom. And it was this confirmation that I knew that God was real, that He is the one that brings us peace. And I needed to just keep my eyes on Him. And it was so easy for the enemy to take my eyes. The enemy wanted me to take my eyes off of Jesus and to doubt everything that I did before this. But He kept reminding me, I am the same God who was there for you when you were 16, the same God who was there for you when you were dealing with challenges as a young child. And I will continue to be that God for you and your family until the day I return. So what am I doing now with ministry? So I am a medical missionary. I am a wellness coach, and also I work with plant-based nutrition as well as fitness. But the heart of my business, which is My Piece of Health coaching services, is to really help families, to bring peace and harmony back to the home, because we know that the greatest medical missionary work, the greatest missionary work we have is going to be that in the home. And that's exactly what Satan is going to attack. So I believe wholeheartedly that if I can help families to see not only where they are struggling with their health when it comes to diet, when it comes to exercise, but when it comes to communication, and when it comes to making sure that they have a Christ-centered home in their house, to keep the faith and to have a relationship with God, I wholeheartedly believe that that is the start of where most of us, even as parents, our health breaks down. Is when we don't see God working with our kids, or when we're struggling to just make the basic make the basic choices for our kids, and we feel like that they are resistant to it. So hoping to bring families back together to have a relationship with him, and also to know that this is where their peace comes from. And so with that being said, I'm so happy and privileged to be able to share my testimony, but also know that God is good, and he is a God of peace, and he loves you. And that same God that was there for you from the beginning is the same God that will be there for you throughout the end. And he loves you, and he cares for you, and he sees you. My name is Candice, and this is what the Lord has done for me.